The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of St. James's Palace like a ghost from centuries past. In the dim light of the barracks, Liam Ferguson stood rigid in front of the long mirror, his reflection staring back at him with a mixture of pride and barely concealed terror. It was his first day. Not his first day as a soldier. He had endured the hellish training at Catterick, the blisters, the shouting, the relentless drills that reduced grown men to tears. No, this was his first day as a King's Guard. And the weight of that distinction pressed down on his shoulders heavier than the bearskin cap he had been issued. The cap itself was a relic, passed down through generations of guardsmen. It was made from the fur of the Canadian black bear, and it stood 18 inches tall. It was also, Liam discovered, incredibly warm. A sweat was already beginning to bead on his forehead, and he hadn't even stepped outside. His scarlet tunic, meticulously brushed by his own hands until it gleamed like a blood-red jewel, felt stiff and formal. He adjusted the white buffalo leather belt, the brass fittings catching the dim light. He was a cog in a machine that had been running smoothly for over 300 years, and the last thing he wanted was to be the one to jam the gears. "All right, lads, listen up," came the gravelly voice of Color Sergeant Davies, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from the granite of a Welsh mountain and whose mustache was a masterpiece of military grooming. He stood before the squad of new guardsmen, his pace, stick, tucked under his arm like a field marshal's baton. "You've been trained. You know the drills. But knowing it in the yard and doing it on the mall with 10,000 tourists pointing their phones at you are two different things. You are not just soldiers today. You are a symbol. You are the visual representation of His Majesty's sovereignty. You do not scratch your nose. You do not adjust your cap. You do not, for any reason whatsoever, react to the idiots who will try to make you laugh. If a child vomits on your boots, you stare ahead. If a terrorist attacks, you react. Clear?" "Yes, Sergeant Major," the squad chorused. Liam's specific posting was to the guard at the front of the palace. He would be one of the 4 sentries visible to the public, standing motionless in the iconic red box. He had dreamed of this as a boy, watching grainy videos on his phone back in his small town in Yorkshire. His grandfather, a veteran of the Falklands, had always told him that the guards were the best of the best. "They don't just stand there, lad," he used to say. "They're listening. They're watching. They are the last line of defense." As the squad marched out of the barracks at Wellington, the band of the Scots Guards struck up a lively tune. The sound of the pipes and drums filled the air, a skirling noise that was both mournful and exhilarating. Liam felt his heart hammer against his ribs. They marched through the gates, and the world exploded into color and noise. The pavements were packed. People stood 10 deep, craning their necks, waving flags, children perched on their fathers' shoulders. The flash of cameras was a constant, blinding strobe. Liam kept his eyes fixed forward, his M4 rifle, minus the ammunition. The public didn't need to know that, but the bayonet was real enough, held at the exact regulation angle. He could hear snippets of conversation as they passed. A loud American voice. "Honey, look! They're real! They actually move!" A child's excited squeal. "Mommy, it's a toy soldier!" A teenager trying to be cool. "Imagine having the most boring job in the world!" Liam wanted to laugh. Boring? He was operating on an adrenaline high so intense his vision was sharpening to a needlepoint. The march down the mall was a blur of red asphalt and green grass. The Duke of York's column loomed to their left, and then Buckingham Palace came into view. It wasn't just a building. It was a statement. The Golden Gates, the vast facade, the royal standard fluttering in the breeze to signify that His Majesty was in residence. This was the stage. And as they approached the forecourt, the old guard was already assembled, a mirror image of themselves. The two forces faced each other, a tableau of crimson and black. The ceremony began. The captain of the guard gave the orders, his voice sharp and precise. The band played. The soldiers marched and counter-marched with a precision that defied belief. For Liam, it was a blur of commands he had rehearsed 1,000 times. Present arms, shoulder arms, the handover of the palace keys, a purely symbolic gesture that nonetheless carried the weight of history. A senior non-commissioned officer from the old guard stepped forward and shook the hand of his counterpart in the new guard. It was a simple handshake, but in that moment, the responsibility shifted. The safety of the monarch, the security of the palace, was now theirs. Finally, the moment came. The old guard marched away to the music of the band, leaving the new guard in their place. Liam was marched to his post, the sentry box directly facing the Victoria Memorial. He took his position, clicking his heels together with a sound that was lost in the general hubbub of the crowd. And then, silence. The world continued to move around him, the tour guides with their umbrellas, the buses rumbling past, the pigeons squabbling at his feet, but he was frozen in time. He was a statue. He was a king's guard. The first hour was the hardest. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the bearskin cap became an instrument of torture. A rivulet of sweat traced a path from his hairline, down his temple, and hovered, tantalizingly at his jawline. It itched. He wanted to wipe it away so badly his muscles twitched with the effort. And he could see a young girl in the crowd, no more than 5 years old, staring up at him with wide, unblinking eyes. She was clutching a teddy bear wearing its own miniature bearskin cap. She waved. Liam did not wave back. She tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, he's not moving. Is he broken?" The mother shushed her, snapping a photo. Broken? No, love, Liam thought, just highly disciplined. Then came the first test. A group of lads, probably students, probably drunk despite the early hour, decided it would be hilarious to try and get a reaction. They stood directly in front of him, pulling faces, doing silly walks, barking like dogs. The crowd watched, some laughing, others looking uncomfortable. Liam stared at a fixed point on the wall of the palace just above their heads. He could see them in his peripheral vision, a blur of motion, and his training kicked in. He emptied his mind. He thought about the cool, damp mornings on the rifle range. He thought about his grandfather's stories. He focused on the faint scent of the polished brass of his belt buckle. The lads grew bored and moved on. They had failed. Liam had won. As the relief guard approached to take over for his first break, Liam allowed himself the tiniest flicker of satisfaction. He had done it. He had stood his ground. He had been a silent, unwavering sentinel. But as he was marched back inside the palace gates, he knew this was just the first skirmish in a very long war. The crowds would get bigger, the taunts might get crueler, and the physical discomfort would only intensify. He was no longer just Liam Ferguson, a boy from Yorkshire. He was part of the fabric of London, a living landmark. And tomorrow, he would have to do it all over again. The first week was a brutal education in the art of stillness. Liam learned that the body was a traitorous thing. It would itch in places he never knew existed. His lower back would scream at him after the first hour. The weight of the rifle would make his arms feel like they were made of lead. But he also learned the tricks of the trade. The subtle shift of weight from one foot to the other, so minute it was invisible to the crowd, but which saved his spine from seizing up entirely. The way to focus his eyes on a distant object to avoid the hypnotic sway of the tourists. The mental games he played to pass the time, counting the red buses that passed, composing letters to his mum in his head, reciting the names of every England football squad he could remember. He also learned about the crowds, and they were a never-ending source of fascination and, occasionally, irritation. There were the history buffs, who looked at him with genuine reverence, sometimes giving him a respectful nod. There were the photographers, who treated him as a subject rather than a person, circling him, crouching low, waiting for the perfect light. And then there were the performers. One afternoon, a woman decided to use him as a prop. She strode right up to the barrier, posed with her back to him, and made her friend take 50 photos. "Get my elbow touching his elbow in the shot. No, wait, make it look like I'm whispering a secret to him." She leaned in close, and Liam could smell her perfume, a cloying, sweet scent that was overwhelming. He stared ahead, his face a mask of stone. She was so close he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. And encounters were not with the well-meaning encounters, were not with the well-meaning tourists or the drunkards. They were with the ones who harbored a deep-seated resentment for the monarchy, for the establishment, for everything the guards represented. A man in a long coat stopped directly in front of him. He didn't shout or wave. He just stood there, his eyes locked on Liam's, a faint, condescending smile playing on his lips. He started muttering, just loud enough for Liam to hear. "Pawn, puppet, wasting your life standing there for a family that doesn't know you exist. Don't you have any self-respect?" The words were designed to wound. They slid into Liam's ear like tiny shards of glass. For a moment, the mask slipped, and just a fraction. A flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Was he a puppet? The man saw the flicker, and his smile widened. He leaned closer. Think about it. You could be doing something real. Instead, you're an ornament. This was the real test, not the physical endurance, but the mental fortress. Color Sergeant Davies had warned them about this. "They will try to get inside your head," he had said. "They will question your purpose. They will try to make you human. Do not let them. Your humanity is not for them. Your humanity is for your family, your friends, your regiment. On that post, you are a concept. You are duty." Liam drew a deep, slow breath, the motion hidden by the stiff tunic. He thought about his grandfather, lying in a hospital bed, telling him to be the best. He thought about the lads in his squad, and the ones who would have his back in a fight. He thought about the king, a man he had never met, but who represented a continuity that Liam believed in. The mask was back, the eyes cleared. The man saw the change. His smile faltered. He muttered something else, then turned and walked away, swallowed by the crowd. Liam had held the line, not with a weapon, but with his will. There were lighter moments, too. One crisp autumn morning, a toddler escaped his parents' grasp and made a break for it. He waddled at top speed toward the palace gates, his destination clearly the immobile man in red. Before the flustered parents could react, the little boy made it to the barrier and stared up at Liam. Liam looked down just for a split second, a micro-movement of his eyes. The boy smiled a gummy smile and offered him a half-eaten biscuit. The crowd gasped, expecting the guardsman to break character. Liam, however, simply returned his gaze to the horizon. The boy, satisfied he had done his duty, turned and waddled back to his hysterical parents. The crowd laughed and applauded. Later, in the guardroom, the story was retold, and even the stony-faced color sergeant allowed himself a small, private smile. Life in the barracks became a routine. The camaraderie was deep. These were men who understood the unique pressure of the job. They shared tips on dealing with hecklers, on enduring the heat, on the best insoles for their boots. They mocked each other mercilessly, a vital release valve for the tension. They were a brotherhood, bound by the shared experience of being the most watched soldiers in the world. Liam began to understand that the guard was not just about standing still. It was about belonging to something far bigger than himself. Winter descended on London, painting the city in shades of gray and bringing a new set of challenges. The tourists thinned out, replaced by hardy souls in thick coats and woolly hats. The cold was a different enemy than the heat. The wind whipped down the Mall, cutting through the thick wool of the greatcoat they now wore over the tunic. The bearskin cap, once an oven, became a lifesaver, keeping his head and ears warm. But the stillness was harder to maintain when your toes had gone numb an hour ago. Liam was now a seasoned guardsman. He had been on palace duty for 4 months. The initial terror had been replaced by a deep-seated competence. He could read the crowd instantly, and spotting the potential troublemakers before they even reached the barrier. He could feel the rhythm of the day, the ebb and flow of visitors. He had even developed a fan base of sorts. A group of elderly ladies who came for a walk every morning always waved at him as they passed. He never waved back, of course, but they knew he saw them. One gray December afternoon, the air heavy with the promise of snow, a different kind of visitor appeared. He was an old man, easily in his 80s, wrapped in a faded tweed coat. He wasn't with a tour group. He was alone. He walked slowly, aided by a polished wooden cane, and stopped directly in front of Liam's sentry post. He didn't take out a phone or a camera. He just stood there, looking at Liam, but also looking through him. Liam noticed him immediately, and there was a quality to the old man's stillness that mirrored his own. He wasn't fidgeting or chatting. He was just watching. After a long moment, the old man gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. His eyes, watery and pale blue, seemed to focus on Liam's regimental insignia. Then, in a quiet voice, just loud enough to carry, he spoke. "Coldstream," he said. "Good choice, lad. Best of the lot." Liam did not respond. He could not respond, but something in his posture must have shifted. A slight relaxation, an acknowledgement. The old man seemed to understand. He leaned heavily on his cane and looked up at the palace facade. "I was here," he said, his voice raspy with age and memory. 1952, the Queen's first year. Just a boy, fresh out of training, scared to death. Thought I'd freeze solid right here on this very spot." He chuckled, then a dry, rustling sound. A connection sparked. This man had stood where Liam was standing, nearly 70 years before. He had worn the same uniform, endured the same tests, faced the same crowds. He was Liam's future, and Liam was his past. The old man continued, as if talking to an old friend. "We didn't have the crowds like this. Things were quieter then, more respectful maybe, or maybe we were just more scared of our officers." He paused, lost in thought. "The day she died. The Queen Mother, I mean. I was on duty. We heard the news whispered through the ranks. The next day, the flowers started arriving, piled up against these very gates, 6 feet deep. The smell of them filled the air for a week. We stood guard over the flowers as much as the palace." Liam felt a lump form in his throat. He fought it down. The old man was a living history book, a link to a bygone era. He was telling Liam about a London that no longer existed, a monarchy that had endured war and loss and change. He spoke of the funeral of Sir Winston Churchill, of the Silver Jubilee, of the day the world changed in 2001, when the atmosphere around the palace grew thick with a shared, silent grief. "You see a lot from this spot, lad," the old man said, his eyes still fixed on the stonework. "You see the best of us and the worst. You see lovers kiss, families fight, politicians strut. And you just stand here. You are the one constant, the one thing they can rely on to be the same tomorrow as it was today." He finally looked back at Liam, and this time his gaze was sharp, piercing. Remember that. It's not about the king. It's about them. He gestured with his chin towards the scattering of tourists. They need to know that some things don't change, that order exists, that someone is watching. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. He held it up for Liam to see. It was a black and white picture of a young guardsman, impossibly young, standing rigidly at attention in front of the palace. The same palace, the same spot. The old man smiled. "That's me," he said. He tucked the photo away, gave Liam another respectful nod, and turned to walk away. He took a few steps, then paused and looked back over his shoulder. "Stand easy, guardsman," he said softly, a phrase usually only uttered by an officer to relax his men. It was a gift, a permission slip from one generation to the next. Then he was gone, disappearing into the gray London afternoon. Liam stood there, the encounter replaying in his mind. The cold didn't seem to bite as hard. The weight of the rifle felt lighter. He had been given a glimpse of the legacy he was now a part of. He wasn't just standing there. He was taking his turn in a vigil that had been kept for centuries. The nameless, faceless men in the old photographs. They were him. And one day, if he was lucky, he would be that old man, telling a young guardsman about the time he saw the world change from this very spot. That night in the barracks, he wrote a long letter to his grandfather. He didn't tell him about the old man, not directly. He just told him that he finally understood why the job mattered. It was a hard thing to put into words, the feeling of being a silent witness to history, and a guardian of a shared national dream. But he tried. The day of the king's official birthday parade, Trooping the Color, dawned bright and clear. It was the pinnacle of the military calendar, a spectacle of pageantry that the whole world watched. For Liam, it was both an honor and a massive logistical headache. The entire brigade was mobilized. The streets were packed with hundreds of thousands of well-wishers. The air hummed with excitement. Liam's role today was different. He wasn't on static guard duty. He was part of the main parade on Horse Guards Parade. He was a piece in a massive, intricate puzzle involving over 1,400 parading soldiers, 200 horses, and 400 musicians. The pressure was immense. One wrong step, one rifle tilted at the wrong angle, and it would be seen by millions. They had been rehearsing for weeks, marching in the early morning hours when the streets were empty. The drill had to be perfect, absolute. Today, there were no second chances. As they formed up, Liam could see the dignitaries gathering on the reviewing stand. The king, mounted on a magnificent black horse, was a figure of regal authority. The royal family watched from a balcony. This was the grand royal red presentation in its full glory. The massed bands of the foot guards struck up a slow march. The sound was overwhelming, a tidal wave of music that seemed to vibrate in his bones. They began the slow march past the king. It was an exercise in controlled, floating motion. Every step was timed to the fraction of a second. Liam's focus was absolute, narrowed to the back of the man in front of him. That the world shrank to the beat of the drums and the precise placement of his feet. The red tunics of the guards formed a river of scarlet against the white stone of the parade ground. The bearskins, polished to a jet-black sheen, bobbed in perfect unison. The brass of the instruments flashed in the sun. This was the part of the job the public never saw, the hours of sweat and toil that went into creating this 15 minutes of flawless perfection. As they marched in slow time, Liam thought about the old man from the winter. He thought about all the guardsmen who had marched here before him, in front of kings and queens long since passed into history. He was part of a chain. The slow march ended. They formed up, then came the command for the quick march. The band switched to a jaunty, faster tune, and the entire parade burst into life, moving with a crisp, rapid precision that was breathtaking to behold. Then came the centerpiece of the ceremony, trooping the color. A regimental flag, or color, was carried slowly down the ranks of guardsmen. In the chaos of battle, the color was the rallying point, the symbol of the regiment's honor. To troop it through the ranks was to remind every soldier what they were fighting for. The ensign carrying the color was flanked by an escort of senior non-commissioned officers. As the color passed, the entire parade presented arms, a ripple of movement and a crash of 1,400 rifles being slapped in unison. The band played the national anthem. For a moment, even the vast crowd seemed to hold its breath. It was a deeply moving, almost sacred moment, even for Liam, who was taking part in it. After the final salute, and after the king had ridden away and the household cavalry had clattered off on their gleaming horses, the day was not over for Liam. He was detailed for a special duty. He was to be part of the king's guard that would march back to Buckingham Palace, headed by the monarch himself. This was the final act, the procession that the crowds lining the mall had been waiting for. As they marched, the king at their head, Liam felt a surge of emotion he hadn't expected. The crowd was roaring. Union Jacks waved everywhere. People were crying, cheering, shouting, "God save the king!" It was an outpouring of affection and national pride that was overwhelming. He was marching behind his king, representing his regiment, his family, his country. The weight of the bearskin was nothing. The exhaustion from the long day was forgotten, and he was lifted by the sheer force of the crowd's joy. As they approached the gates of Buckingham Palace, the king acknowledged the salutes of the guard and rode inside. The parade marched in behind him, the band still playing. Once inside the quadrangle, the strict discipline relaxed. Just a fraction. As they dispersed, Liam found himself standing near the color sergeant. The old soldier looked at him, his eyes glistening with something that might have been pride. "Well, Ferguson," he said, his voice gruff to hide the emotion. "You did all right today." It was the highest praise he could have hoped for. Liam nodded. "Thank you, Sergeant Major." Later that evening, as the sun set over London, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Liam stood by the window of the guard room, and he could see the crowds still lingering by the Victoria Memorial, taking last photos as the palace lights came on. He thought about the long journey from that terrified first morning to this triumphant day. He thought about the drunk students, the angry protester, the little boy with the biscuit, and the old man in the tweed coat. They had all taught him something. He was no longer just a soldier standing still. He was a guardian of tradition, a witness to history, a silent participant in the nation's story. The uniform was more than cloth and fur. It was a skin he had grown into. The palace was more than a building. It was a home, and he was one of its protectors. Tomorrow, the crowds would be smaller, the ceremony routine. But Liam would stand his post with the same unwavering focus. Because he wasn't just doing a job, and he was living a legacy, one silent, steady beat at a time. And as the last of the daylight faded, he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that this was exactly where he was meant to be.